There's a moment right before you fall asleep when your brain does something it never does while you're awake. It stops pretending. And if you paid attention to that moment tonight, you might notice something uncomfortable. You're not actually tired. You're just done resisting. That's not the same thing. In Japan, there's a quiet understanding about sleep that most of the world skipped past on its way to melatonin gummies and blackout curtains. It's not about forcing your body to shut down. It's about ending the day in a way that makes shutting down unnecessary because you were never fully on to begin with. Stick around because by the end of this, you'll understand why the way you're falling asleep tonight might be the exact reason you wake up tired tomorrow. And if any of this lands for you, go ahead and subscribe now so the rest of what's coming doesn't slip past you. Picture a small apartment in Kyoto. It's just past 9 at night. The dishes are done. There's steam rising from a deep square tub. Not a quick rinse, but a real soak. Water up to the shoulders, the kind of heat that makes your skin turn slightly pink. Nobody's rushing. There's no phone on the edge of the tub. Just quiet and heat and a body slowly giving up its tension 1 degree at a time. This is the first thing worth noticing. Not the bath itself, the timing of it. Your body has an internal thermostat and it uses temperature as a signal for sleep. Right before you fall asleep naturally, your core temperature drops. Not your skin, your core. A hot bath, taken about 90 minutes before bed, does something almost paradoxical. It raises your temperature first, hard and fast, and then lets it fall, faster and further than it would have on its own. That drop is the signal. Your body reads it as nightfall arriving, even if the sun set hours ago. Most people do the opposite without realizing it. A hot shower right before lying down keeps the body warm exactly when it should be cooling. You climb into bed still radiating heat, kick off the blanket at 2 a.m., bros, and wonder why your sleep felt shallow. The Japanese ritual isn't about cleanliness. It's about engineering a temperature drop on purpose instead of leaving it to chance. Here's where it gets interesting because this same idea, using the body to talk to the mind instead of the other way around, shows up again in the next thing, and it's a lot stranger than a bath. Walk into a traditional Japanese bedroom, and you'll notice something missing. There's no bed frame, no box spring lifting you 2 feet into the air. Just a futon, thin and firm, laid directly on tatami mat, inches from the floor. At first, this looks like minimalism, or maybe just tradition. But there's a psychological reason it persists, generation after generation, in a country that has no shortage of modern furniture. Sleeping low to the ground changes your relationship to the room. There's less separation between you and the space around you. Your nervous system, whether you're aware of it or not, registers height as a kind of exposure. Think about how vulnerable you feel standing near the edge of a rooftop versus how safe you feel sitting on the floor with your back against a wall. Lying close to the ground taps into something ancient in the body. It reads as grounded, literally. There's also a quieter, more practical layer. In the morning, the futon gets folded and put away. The room that held your sleep at night becomes something else entirely by day. A place to eat, to work, to sit with tea. Your brain doesn't associate that space with lying awake at 3 a.m., scrolling through something you'll forget by breakfast. The room has no memory of your restlessness because every night it starts over. Ask yourself honestly, does your bedroom feel like a place of rest? Or does it feel like a place where you've spent hours awake, frustrated, waiting for sleep that wouldn't come? Because your brain remembers that too. Environments carry emotional residue, whether we admit it or not. Think about a hotel room for a second. Notice how easily you sleep there sometimes, even on an unfamiliar mattress with unfamiliar noise outside the window. Part of that is simple novelty, but part of it is that the room has no history with you. It never watched you lie awake at 2 a.m. scrolling through nothing. It has no memory to remind you of. A futon folded away every morning quietly recreates that same blank slate night after night inside your own home without you ever having to travel anywhere to find it. Now here's the part almost nobody talks about, and it's the piece that changes everything else you just heard. There's a word in Japanese, danshari, that roughly means the practice of discarding what's unnecessary. It's usually used for physical clutter, closets, drawers, the accumulation of things you don't need. But the same instinct shows up at night in a much quieter form. Before bed, there's often a small, almost invisible ritual of finishing. Dishes washed, surfaces cleared, tomorrow's clothes set out. Nothing dramatic, just small completed loops. And it turns out this matters more than most sleep advice ever mentions, because an unfinished task doesn't just sit quietly in the kitchen. It sits in your head. There's a name for this in psychology, sometimes called the Zeigarnik effect, where incomplete tasks stay mentally active, looping in the background long after you've stopped consciously thinking about them. That's the low hum you feel lying in bed, thinking about an email you didn't send, a dish still in the sink, a decision you postponed. Your body is in bed. Your mind is still standing in yesterday's unfinished doorway. So the decluttering isn't really about tidiness. It's about closing loops before you ask your brain to power down. You can't expect stillness at night if you spent the evening leaving things open. And this is where the real story starts to shift. Because up until now, this has sounded like a conversation about bathing and floors and mess. But it was never really about any of that. It's about attention, where it goes, what it's still holding on to quietly in the background, even while you tell yourself you're relaxing. Here's a thought experiment. Think about the last few nights you slept badly. Really think about it. Was it because your room was too hot? Or was it because your mind was somewhere else entirely? Were you replaying a conversation, rehearsing tomorrow, holding on to something you never actually put down? Most people treat sleep like a switch. Awake, then asleep. But it's not a switch. It's a landing. And you can't land a plane that's still climbing. If any part of this feels a little too familiar, a little too close to your own nights, you're not alone in that. And there's a lot more where this came from. A full breakdown of these routines, along with several other Japanese evening practices that didn't make it into this video, lives in the material linked in the description and the first comment. It goes deeper into how these small physical rituals rewire the nervous system over time, not just for one better night, but for weeks of steadier sleep. Keep watching though, because the biggest piece of this is still ahead. Let's go back to that idea of landing, because it explains something most sleep advice gets backwards. We've been taught to think of insomnia as a nighttime problem, something that happens at 11 p.m. when you close your eyes and your brain won't cooperate. But by the time you're lying in the dark, the outcome has usually already been decided. The real event happened hours earlier in the transition, or the lack of one, between your day and your night. In Japan, this transition has a name too, though it's less a word and more a feeling. Ma. It refers to the space between things, the pause, the silence between two notes that makes the music mean something. Not absence, presence of a different kind. Most modern evenings have no ma. Dinner ends and a screen begins. One stimulus replaces another with no gap between them. Your nervous system never gets the signal that the day is actually over because there's no quiet moment marking the boundary. You go from stimulation to bed, and then you're surprised your mind won't stop moving once the lights go out. The fourth practice worth understanding is this deliberate creation of empty space in the evening. Not meditation, not a formal practice, just unstructured, quiet time with nothing demanding your attention. Sitting with tea, looking out a window, folding laundry without a podcast playing over it. Genuinely doing nothing on purpose for a stretch of minutes that feels almost uncomfortable at first because we're so unused to it. This is the part people resist the most because doing nothing feels unproductive, but it isn't. It's processing time. Your brain needs unstimulated space to file away the day. And if you never give it that space, it tries to do the filing at 1 a.m. instead, replaying moments, rehearsing arguments, running through your to-do list while you stare at the ceiling. Now, quick pause. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who actually cares about getting your nights right, not just watching another sleep video and forgetting it by tomorrow. So go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't. Drop a like. And if there's one of these 5 practices you already know you're missing, say which one in the comments. It helps more than you'd think, and it's genuinely interesting to see which one people recognize themselves in the most. Now here's where all 4 of these ideas, now the bath, the floor, the closing of loops, the empty space, actually converge into something bigger than sleep advice. Because they're not really 4 separate tips. They're 4 expressions of the same underlying instinct. Every single one of them is about ending things properly. The bath ends the body's heat cycle deliberately. The floor ends the day's use of the room, resetting it by morning. The small rituals end the day's tasks, closing loops instead of leaving them open. The quiet time ends the day's stimulation, creating a boundary the mind can actually recognize. Nothing in this list is really about sleep hygiene in the way we usually talk about it. Cooler rooms, no caffeine, avoiding screens. Those things matter, sure, but they're surface level. What's actually happening underneath is a culture that treats endings as something you do on purpose, rather than something that just eventually happens to you when you run out of energy. And that's worth sitting with for a second, because most of us don't end our days. We just stop them. We collapse into bed the way a phone dies, not because it finished doing anything, but because the battery ran out mid-task. And then we wonder why the next morning doesn't feel like a real beginning either. Of course it doesn't. Nothing actually ended the night before. Think about how strange that is when you say it plainly. We plan our mornings with real intention, an alarm, a routine, sometimes a whole checklist. But the night before, the part that actually determines how that morning feels, gets no intention at all. It just happens to us in whatever order the evening decided to unfold. We've been managing the wrong end of the day this entire time. This brings us to the fifth practice, and it's the quietest one, but it might be the most important because it isn't something you do before bed. It's something you do the moment you wake up. In many Japanese households, there's very little flexibility around wake time. Even after a rough night, you don't sleep in to compensate. You get up, you open the shoji screens, you let the light in, no matter how the night went. It sounds almost cruel at first. Shouldn't a bad night earn you an extra hour of rest? But your body's internal clock doesn't work on fairness. It works on consistency. Every time you sleep in to make up for a bad night, you push your internal clock later, which makes the next night harder to fall asleep at a normal time, which makes you want to sleep in again the next morning. It's a slow drift, and most people are living somewhere inside that drift without ever noticing it's happening. Waking at the same time, especially with natural light, is what actually recalibrates the whole system. It's the anchor that keeps the bath, the floor, the closed loops, and the quiet evening time all pointed in the same direction. Without it, the other four practices are fighting against a clock that keeps sliding out of position. So here's the moment where the whole picture comes together. It was never really about Japanese culture or futons or bathtubs. Those are just the visible surface of something much simpler. A relationship with time that treats each day as something with a real beginning and a real end, instead of a blur that bleeds into the next one. Think back to that first moment we talked about. The one right before sleep. When your brain stops pretending. That moment isn't random. It's earned, or it isn't, based on everything that happened in the hours before it. A body that cooled down on schedule. A room that wasn't carrying yesterday's noise. A mind that closed its loops instead of dragging them into the dark. And a stretch of nothing on purpose that gave your thoughts somewhere to land before your head did. None of this requires a tatami room or a Japanese bathtub. It requires something much harder to buy and much easier to overlook. The decision to actually end your day instead of just running out of hours in it. Tonight, you probably won't build all 5 of these into your evening. That's fine. Pick one. Maybe it's the bath, timed properly instead of rushed. Maybe it's just clearing the counter and answering the one text you've been avoiding so your brain has one less loop to spin. Small, deliberate endings, repeated enough times, start to feel like something bigger than a routine. They start to feel like control in a part of life that usually feels completely out of your hands. If this changed the way you think about your evenings even a little, that's exactly the kind of shift worth holding on to. So take a second now to subscribe and share this with the one person in your life who always says they just can't sleep. Because chances are it was never really about the sleep. It was about everything that happened before it. Picture it one more time. The water finally cooling, the room dark, the futon low against the floor, nothing left unfinished on the counter, nothing left unsaid in your head. Not a dramatic ending, just a complete one. That's the whole secret, really. Hiding inside 5 small rituals that never needed to be complicated in the first place. And maybe tonight, when you notice that quiet moment right before your eyes close, it won't feel like giving up on the day anymore. It might just feel like finally finishing it.